The ceasefire that was supposed to end the Iran war is collapsing in real time this weekend, with strikes and counterstrikes hitting 4 countries in under 72 hours, and the President of the United States posting that Iran will no longer exist if it continues. Trump's showpiece celebration of America's 250th birthday opened this week with the power out, the ice cream melted, the Ferris wheel broken, and roughly a fifth of the country's states refusing to show up at all. And a 105-year-old Modigliani portrait just sold for $64 million, which is the kind of story I genuinely enjoy getting to tell you after the other two. Let's get into all three. Start with Iran, because what's happened over the last 3 days deserves to be understood as exactly what it is: the ceasefire failing in public, in real time, with both sides trading blame and bombs simultaneously. Here's the sequence, reconstructed from multiple independent confirmations. Early Saturday morning, an Iranian one-way attack drone struck the Panamanian-flagged tanker Kiku, which was carrying crude oil for Qatar's state energy company, Qatar, notably, being one of the primary mediators trying to hold this entire deal together. U.S. Central Command responded with strikes Friday and again Saturday, hitting what it described as Iranian surveillance infrastructure, communication systems, air defense sites, drone storage facilities, and mine layer capabilities, specifically in the coastal area of Syria. Trump posted on Truth Social that the U.S. struck Iranian missile and drone storage locations and coastal radar sites for violating the ceasefire agreement, again, and then added the line that should stop anyone following this story cold. He warned of a point where the U.S. might no longer be able to be reasonable and would be forced to militarily complete the job, concluding, if that happens, the Islamic Republic of Iran will no longer exist. That is the President of the United States threatening, in writing, on a public platform, the complete elimination of a sovereign nation-state. I want to sit with that for a second, rather than rushing past it as just more escalatory rhetoric in a war that's produced plenty of it. There's a meaningful difference between "we will strike military targets" and "your country will no longer exist." One is a threat of continued conflict. The other is a threat of national annihilation, posted casually on social media in the middle of a negotiating process that the same administration is simultaneously describing as nearly successful. Iran's response came within hours. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps announced early Saturday, depending on which time zones reporting they're tracking, that its Navy and aerospace forces had launched joint missile and drone operations against U.S.-linked military sites across the region. Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, the largest American base in the entire Middle East. Ali Al Salem Air Base in Kuwait, Al Dhafra Air Base in the UAE, and the U.S. Fifth Fleet headquarters in Bahrain. Qatar's Ministry of Defense confirmed Al Udeid was hit, with no casualties reported. Kuwait's military said it intercepted 2 ballistic missiles, with no injuries or damage. Bahrain's Interior Ministry reported that Iranian strikes damaged an 8-story residential building near the international airport, with the top floor destroyed and windows blown out. Though no fatalities, and Bahrain's foreign ministry didn't mince words in its response, calling it a dangerous escalation that reveals that what Tehran is doing is not a passing act, nor an isolated incident, but rather a deliberate approach and a systematic pattern. The IRGC's statement carried its own explicit threat back at Washington. Violating the ceasefire is contrary to Clause 1 of the Islamabad Memorandum of Understanding, and will result in the complete halt of all diplomatic processes. Iran also redeclared the Strait of Hormuz closed again, accusing the U.S. and Israel of violating the memorandum, specifically citing the unresolved Lebanon ceasefire, which Israel invaded in pursuit of Hezbollah back in March and has continued striking since. And here's a detail that's gotten almost no attention amid the military back and forth: the International Maritime Organization's phased evacuation of more than 11,100 seafarers who've been stranded in the Gulf since February. The human story I flagged earlier this month as the part of this war that keeps getting lost under oil price coverage has been paused again, following the drone strike on the Kiku. Those 11,000 people had finally started sailing home. As of this weekend, they're stuck again, waiting on a ceasefire that two governments are actively bombing each other over. I want to be precise about the structural problem underneath all of this, because it explains why this exact cycle, US strikes, Iranian retaliation, mutual accusations, strait closure, pause, is so hard to break out of. Repeat. Keeps happening roughly every 2 weeks. RFERL's Day 120 assessment captured it clearly. This pattern echoed an almost identical exchange from earlier in the month, one that had gone quiet for roughly 2 weeks before the renewed exchange. Mojtaba Khamenei, who became Iran's supreme leader after his father was killed in the war's opening strikes and hasn't been seen publicly since, authorized the underlying memorandum on June 18th with an explicit caveat that negotiating with the US would not mean accepting the enemy's point of view. That's not a man fully committed to the deal holding. That's a leader managing a domestic political balance between the economic relief the ceasefire has delivered and the IRGC's evident determination to keep its kinetic and maritime leverage intact rather than subordinate it to the negotiating track. As the same analysis put it, both governments are, right now, simultaneously claiming the other broke the deal first, while each side's hardliners get exactly the justification they wanted to keep fighting. A deal that both sides can credibly claim the other one broke isn't a stable deal. It's a script that both sides know how to perform when they need an excuse. That's a war that may or may not actually be ending. Here's a birthday party that definitely isn't going well. Trump's Great American State Fair, officially branded Freedom 250. The centerpiece of the celebration marking America's 250th birthday, opened this week on the National Mall, and the gap between how it was supposed to look and how it's actually gone has been genuinely remarkable to watch unfold in real time. The problems started before the doors even opened. In the days leading up to launch, at least 10 states and territories, Connecticut, Oregon, Washington, Maine, Alaska, the U.S. Virgin Islands, Massachusetts, Illinois, Rhode Island, Vermont, North Carolina, and Pennsylvania, depending on which day's reporting you're reading, since the list kept growing, announced they wouldn't send official delegations, with most citing the cost of staffing a 16-day event. That left several state booths reduced to, in the words of one Boston Globe reporter visiting Maine's space, just an empty room with some chairs and walls with lobster and Maine facts. One retired Massachusetts teacher named Donna, 72, was so bothered by her state's empty booth that she drove 9 hours from western Massachusetts on her own initiative, bringing cases of maple syrup and kids' coloring books, and has been volunteering there solo from roughly 8 in the morning to 9 at night. That's a genuinely lovely thing for one private citizen to do. It's also a fairly damning indictment of an events organization when its actual representation depends on a 72-year-old retiree improvising with maple syrup because the state government itself declined to participate. Then came the execution problems. On the very first full day, attendees reported the food hall losing power entirely, with vendors unable to keep items refrigerated and, famously, the entire ice cream selection melting before a resupply could even arrive. The 110-foot Ferris wheel, one of the fair's marquee attractions, shut down for roughly 2 hours due to generator issues. West Virginia's booth had to close over air conditioning failures. Freedom 250's own spokesperson, Julia Friedland, characterized all of this to the Washington Post as mere power hiccups, which is one way to describe an entire food hall losing electricity at a $250 million national celebration. Then there's the attendance question, which has its own credibility gap worth naming directly. Trump posted on Truth Social that the opening night crowd was incredible, packed to the brim, with at least 45,000 people. Independent, on-the-ground reporting from multiple outlets told a very different story. Videos showing attendees streaming toward the exits before Trump's own speech had even finished. Thin crowds with minimal lines to enter, and some independent estimates placing actual attendance at just over 1,000 people. The Washington Post described opening day crowds as relatively sparse compared with past national mall events. That's not a small discrepancy. It's the difference between 45,000 and roughly 1,000. A gap of more than 40 times, both describing the exact same evening. And then, because the week apparently needed one more layer of controversy, North Carolina's privately sponsored exhibit displayed what a spokesperson called an unapproved image, depicting the Confederate flag in a video inside the pavilion, prompting North Carolina's governor's office to formally demand organizers stop dishonoring the flag of North Carolina. Language that, depending on how you read it, is either defending the state's actual flag from association with the Confederate one, or something murkier. The fair closed early Friday due to rain, with Saturday's programming put in jeopardy by forecasted thunderstorms. Former Congressman Adam Kinzinger summarized the general online reaction with a one-word post, "Wow," linking to coverage of the controversy. The Atlantic's headline put it more directly. The Great American State Fair isn't very great. I don't think a flop state fair is, on its own, a story of major national consequence. What it is, though, is a useful and oddly clarifying data point about something larger. An administration that has spent this entire year struggling with the gap between the version of events it announces and the version that's actually verifiably happening. Whether that's a peace deal that keeps collapsing, an attendance figure that independent reporting contradicts by a factor of 40, or a celebration of the country's 250th anniversary that several states didn't think was worth the airfare to attend. None of those things are equivalent in stakes. All of them share the same shape. And now, because this week has earned a clean, uncomplicated story with absolutely nothing to be critical about, let's talk about a painting. Sotheby's sold New Assiso Collier, seated nude wearing a necklace, by Amedeo Modigliani for $63.9 million this week, the highest price ever achieved for a work by the Italian painter at auction in Europe. Modigliani, who died in 1920 at just 35, is known for his distinctive elongated portraits, long necks, almond-shaped eyes, simplified facial features that manage to feel both ancient and startlingly modern at the same time. His nudes were genuinely scandalous when he painted them in the 1910s. One Paris gallery show of his work was famously shut down by police on its opening day for indecency, which tells you something about how far ahead of his contemporary audience he actually was. He never lived to see the prices his work would eventually command. He died in poverty, largely unrecognized, and the market's verdict on his genius arrived posthumously and has only grown more emphatic with each passing decade. I don't have a critical angle here, and for once I'm genuinely glad not to need one. A painting made in 1917 by a man who died broke and largely unappreciated, just sold for nearly $64 million, which is about as close as the art market gets to a happy ending. Sometimes the story really is just that good. 3 stories today. A ceasefire that was announced as a historic achievement just 3 weeks ago is now collapsing through strikes on 4 countries in 72 hours, with the American president threatening a nation's complete annihilation in writing, while 11,000 stranded sailors wait, again, for a strait that keeps closing every time the diplomacy breaks down. A $250 million national birthday celebration opened with the power out, the ice cream melted, and roughly a fifth of the country deciding it wasn't worth showing up for. And a painter who died penniless and unrecognized just had the art world settle, conclusively, that he was right, and everyone who ignored him in 1917 was wrong. 2 of those stories are about institutions failing to deliver what they promised, in real time, with the gap getting harder to paper over by the day. The third is about a verdict that took over a century to arrive, but arrived anyway.